Well, good morning to all of you. So I run an oil and gas company. And let me ask you, do you trust me? Do you trust me to produce oil and gas safely? Do you trust me to do the right thing for climate change? Now, you work in the tech sector, so I ask myself, do I trust you? Do I trust you with my credit card details, with data on my wife, my children, my friends? I think both of our industries could do much better on trust. I'm sure that my industry can do a whole lot better. Now, my company is still trusted in many parts of the world, but we also have to be honest, trust in Shell has faded over the decades in Western Europe. But today, it doesn't take decades for trust to fade. Today, things can go very fast. When things go wrong, everybody knows instantly. And believe it or not, that, as a matter of fact, is good news for tech, because the alarm bells at least are ringing quite clearly. Think of the tax demands, Senate hearings, multi-billion-dollar fines, potentially for antitrust, very clear alarm bells. My company got a very important alarm bell back in 2004, when we frankly had to conclude that some of our executives had lied about the reserves that we had on our books, which turned out to be less than we had said publicly. So that was a painful affair, because we had to recognize that we even didn't get the basics right, because honesty is pretty basic when it comes to trust. What's also basic is doing no harm. And for oil and gas, that means doing no harm to people, being safe, but also doing no harm to the environment. And also there we had to admit, if you look at our track record in Nigeria, that we didn't always get that right as well, doing no harm to the environment. So getting the basics right actually sounds a whole lot easier than it is in practice. And when you don't get the basics right, there's actually only three things you can do. It's first of all, say sorry. Secondly, really learn from that. And thirdly, of course, repair the damage that you have done. Now, also that may sound a whole lot easier than it really is, because frankly speaking, we are still, at this point in time, embedding the lessons that we learned in 2004. And if you look at leaks in Nigeria, well, I'm afraid they're still there. Admittedly, many caused by others, by sabotage. But still, there are still leaks. We still make mistakes today. We still have to learn all the time. Now, the tech equivalent of this may be data leaks. Even the most careful companies among you will make mistakes, and everybody is subject to hacking attacks. So the basics are not easy. But let's also face it, the basics are a pretty low bar to jump over. We simply have to do better than just getting the basic right. And for a start, we have to make sure that our products are a good fit for society. We have products that customers actually need and want. Now here I think we are in a pretty good place. The good news is that our products actually do fit in society. If you think of energy, energy is all around you. Think of the chairs you are sitting on, some of the apparel you are carrying, the food that you may be eating, the phones in your pockets or maybe in your hands. All of them rely on energy or petrochemicals or both. And, you know, the same is true for tech. Tech can point out how communications have brought people together, how the digital world has brought us so much convenience, how we now have knowledge at our fingertips all around the world. So like energy, the benefits of tech are all around us. Now, the disadvantage of that is it gets taken for granted. So neither your industry nor my industry can ever stop making the case for its products. Now, that's not to say that we should be falling in love with our own products. It's true that tech has a lot to admire when it looks at its own reflection, but we have to see things as they truly are. That means that we also have to recognize that not everything is wonderful about our products. So for my sector, that means that we have to admit that producing and using energy causes greenhouse gases, and that may be the route to climate change. So we have to face all of that. We have to face the world as it is, as the saying goes, warts and all. Now, what's the answer then? The answer, frankly speaking, is to engage with society and to behave responsibly. For Shell, that means that we have to work on greenhouse gas emissions, and not just greenhouse gas emissions in the production of energy, but also working on the greenhouse gas emissions of the use of our products, the greenhouse gas emissions of our energy customers. Now, your challenges are different. In your case, it may all be about user addiction, it may be about trolling, it may be about fraud, but even though they are different issues, the solutions are pretty much the same. That is, engage with society and behave responsibly. But trust is pretty hard to earn. So all the things that I've said now, get the basics right, make sure that your products are relevant, wanted and needed, that's still not enough, because society expects a whole lot more. Society's expectations are rising, it wants and expects more. And we could argue that, we contribute also more. Look at our industry. We contribute energy, but also we supply massive scale employment. Wherever we invest, we bring prosperity with our projects. We bring education. We collect billions of taxes. We pay billions of taxes. And I'm sure that tech could come up with a similar list of many things that it can contribute and does contribute. But the problem with this stuff is it only gets noticed when you do not do it. So we have to do more. We will do more. In Shell, we will do more. For instance, we said by 2030, we will bring affordable and clean energy to 100 million people who currently do not have access to energy in places like Africa and in India. And we will not do that as a charity. No, we will turn that into a business. Because only through running things as a business, investing in a business, can we break materiality, can we bring scale, can we really sustain access to energy. Now, we do that, of course, because it is, after all, a business opportunity, a tough one to crack. But we also do it because we want to fully contribute. We want to truly be a force for good in society. And access to energy is part and parcel of that. This ambition will transform lives, not only of 100 million new customers, but also of those that are associated and surrounded by these 100 million new customers. Now, how will you contribute? Well, that's for you to determine. It will be different for every company, but whatever you choose, the fact is, trust can only be won and can only be kept if society can clearly see that you are right alongside it, listening to concerns and expectations, acting in line with them, and you can only make sure that society does that if you are totally transparent, because people do not trust if they can only see half the picture. You have to show as much as you can. And that has been another big lesson for Shell, transparency. It's not anymore just publishing numbers, being in compliance, being seen to do the right thing. It's about actually doing the right thing. And that's why we have embraced transparency. For instance, in tax, we have signed up to the B Team Responsible Tax Principles, which means that we are open about all the corporate entities that we own and why we own them. Transparency gives people all the information they need to make up their own minds on whether you are trustworthy or not. And of course, your industry has made this a whole lot easier. Fighting bribery and corruption is another very important thing to get right, because society's expectations are rising. Even if we believe that a transaction or a deal is perfectly legal at this point in time, if society somehow perceives that it's not ethical, they will still hold you to account. And that's exactly what is happening to us at the moment, in a court action and an investigation that we have on a Nigerian oil block, OPL 245. That continues to be a very difficult experience for us, particularly on how we are being perceived in that story. And with hindsight, it's not one of those things that we would like to find ourselves again exposed to. You will have your own ethical challenges, but it basically comes down to a healthy company is an ethical company, and unethical behavior is a disease. Now, the good thing about a disease is it can be treated, you can inoculate yourself against it, and you do that by creating an environment where unethical behavior is simply seen as unacceptable by all your employees. All your employees know if they behave unethically, they will be exposed. and the company will condemn them. All of us have to get these things right, because people in the future will judge our actions of today. What may be acceptable today may not anymore be acceptable in 5 or 10 years' time. And that means that we have to ask ourselves all the time questions like, how do we know for sure that this deal or this thing that we are doing is right? What would a headline be in the newspapers in 10 years' time on this particular deal? Is this thing going to stand the test of time? And that's the Shell way now. Never stop answering, asking questions, acting appropriately on them. Give yourself a chance to being trusted today and for many years to come. Ultimately, the key to get and keep trust is to give the public every reason to trust you and no single reason to distrust you. That's true for my industry, for oil and gas, but I think it's also true for tech. So whatever you might think of oil and gas, whatever you might think of Shell, whatever you might think of me, I ask you to trust me on this thing. You really want to get the basics right. You really want to get your products right. And you really want to stay in step with society. Or you can take it from me, society will leave you right behind. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage, from Bloomberg, Annmarie Hordern.
Nice to see you.
See you.
Interesting to see you at a massive tech summit. Let's begin with the title of this panel. I think it implies that big tech isn't moving fast enough with their mistakes they've made in the public. You've mentioned some of them: privacy, hackers, even sexual harassment. Do you agree? Are they not moving quick enough?
I think it would be a very difficult argument to make that we are moving quick enough. I think, and it's maybe not so much that tech isn't moving quick enough. Society is moving so quickly, partly because of tech, that you have to do everything to get ahead of the curve, and I don't think that is happening at the moment.
We all know companies make mistakes. I think of in oil and gas, BP in the Gulf. You mentioned Shell's reserve crisis, Nigeria environmental crisis, human rights crisis, many say were severe. The question is, how do you gain back public trust?
Well, as I said before, you have to sincerely reflect on what you have done. And if you have made a mistake, admit it. I mean, mistakes do get made. But then also repair the damage that you have caused. Make sure that you don't make the mistake again. And really perhaps reflect more deeply on why it is that these things happen and how you prevent them from happening again. What may be wrong with your culture in your company as well?
Facebook just this week admitted that its platform has been used to incite violence in Myanmar. Many have said big oil for years put the bottom line ahead of human welfare. Do you think the tech world is about to, or making that same mistake?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with a focus on the bottom line. But in my mind, it all starts with the products. If you make a product that society really needs with high utility, you better make a profit on it, because that's the only way to make that product scalable and to make sure that it economically is sustainable. So there's nothing wrong with profits. But you have to make sure that you make profits from products with general and genuine utility. And you understand also the unintended consequences of product use. So being a good product steward is equally important.
What do you make of what some say in the tech world is the arrogance of this world? Many of these executives became billionaires in their 20s. They were lauded as geniuses, and now publicly they're being called out for some of their mistakes. Do you think they have the humility and flexibility to really change their cultures and their companies?
Well, let me not try and comment on individuals, but our industry also has been accused often of arrogance and lack of humility. And I think if you were to go back in time, right to the birth of our industry, much like where tech is at the moment, I think we were tremendously arrogant. And it took us a long time to shed some of that. So yes, I think deeply reflecting on why you are where you are, always act with humility, is a very important thing to do. Now, it's easier to act with humility if things have really gone wrong, and if you have a track record to reflect on, a negative track record to reflect on. So I think in that sense, humility perhaps comes a little bit easier for us than for a sector that's still relatively young.
One thing these two industries really struggle with is diversity, and I guess a lot of industries do. Shell, I know your number 2 is a female, the CFO, Jessica. What do you think both oil and technology need to do to become less of an all-boys club?
Well, you know, I once had a fantastic female boss who said if you want to have more senior females or females in leadership positions, you have to start by putting more females in leadership positions. Now, that may sound self-evident, but I think unless you have a significant concentration of females in senior positions, you will always have micro inequities that are very hard to spot if you are indeed in an all-boys club. So being very conscious about inequities, making sure that you get to a tipping point where these things are being exposed and people are being conscious about them is very important. In Shell, over the last 10 years, we have grown from around 10% females in our top 1,200 people to now 23%. And I hope we will get that soon to over 30%. And I think that's when the tipping point starts to come, when we really start to feel like an inclusive society from a gender perspective.
How hard is it as well? I want to go back to the cultural thing. Facebook infamously had this model, move fast and break things. I think they've changed it a bit. Do you think that kind of cultural mission and ethos is a bit reckless?
Well, actually, that's part of the piece of the tech world that I quite admire. Of course, you know, move fast and breaking things doesn't particularly work well for the oil and gas industry. But, you know, as a result of our conservatism and risk avoidance, for very good reasons, I think we probably have become insufficiently agile in areas where it's also needed and wanted. So I think you have to get the right balance. Again, be agile, be experiential, sort of act your way into learning new things where you can, but also be very rigorous when it comes to true risks and be very reflective on your products and the stewardship role that you have. And getting that balance right takes time, takes experience.
That brings me on to my next question. What could big oil learn from big tech? This Web Summit, a lot of people are talking about electric cars. The tech world is really revolutionizing transportation, energy. I know you yourself, he owns 2 electric cars, which is very rare for any oil and gas CEO to own electric cars or hybrids. So what do you think the oil world can take away from tech?
Well, I think, first of all, if you look at digitalization is a huge force. There's 2 big forces going on at the moment in society. One is the energy transition, caused by climate change, but partly also caused by digital. And I think, you know, if you want to be a company of the future, because relevance of products also applies to us, you have to embrace digital technology. Because actually it will help change the energy system from a more oil and gas dominated system to much more electrically dominated as well. And the electrical opportunity is the massive opportunity in front of us. So, you know, I consider myself driving an electric car, also using my product for the future, if you like. So I think, yes, we need to look at digital not only to help transform the product suite that we have, but also the ways of working. I just talked about agility. I think we can learn an awful lot from the tech sector when it comes to agile ways of working. Very quickly, do you think in the future we'll be talking about the price of cobalt like we talk about the price of oil? Oh, I'm sure we will be. Of course, as things shift into new resources that are needed for this massively growing electrical system. Think of it for a moment. Yeah? If you want to get to 1.5 degrees C, we probably have to build an electrical system in this world that is 5 times as big as what we have at the moment. The last one, the current one, took 100 years to build. The next 4 ones may take 10 years each. So, of course, there are going to be tremendous strains and stresses and opportunities in the general resource sector as well. And that, I think, is going to be an incredibly exciting time to come. Shell CEO Ben van Beurden, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you.